again, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to say that this webinar was kind of a passion project for me. And it's really about what this title says here, which is how can we be better at making things that save time? I think a lot of us are feeling the burden of being overworked and a little too busy right now. And it kind of creates this vicious cycle of it's really hard to make time to save time, which then snowballs into you just got to get your work done. And I think that conundrum, in this moment right now is probably something that we all feel. And as we think about how we can be better at managing that, I really want to show you something that we do at Applied Software. And this is something that is really a methodology that helps us make things faster in less time. And understand that, you're talking to someone that does wear the hat of BIM manager and CAD manager and programmer, developer. I wear a lot of hats at Applied Software, and this presentation is really going to be speaking to all of those hats. So if that is a hat that you wear, this presentation could be helpful for you. So let's kind of jump in. And I want to start with this question: why Agile? I'm gonna break down what it is. I'm gonna explain a little bit of the history and how it's impacted industries and how you can apply it as a BIM manager or as a CAD manager or even just as a project manager. But here's the thing: why is really important. And if you really want to take a step back and think about what does Agile do, if you embrace it as a framework to help with the delivery of your project work, it really, in my opinion, does three big things. One, it helps you bring your tools, your products, your Revit families, your dynamic blocks, your LISP routines, your Dynamo graphs, whatever they are, the thing that you're responsible for building. This is a great methodology to help you shorten the development time of making those things. Again, we're busy, so how can we find time to save time? Now, we're going to get into why that is here in a bit, but again, just high level, this is a very powerful attribute of Agile. Now, another thing that's worth mentioning is that Agile is a great way to drive engagement, elevate engagement from your office. We are building things for customers and in Agile, and you are building things for your office teammates, your production teams, whatever that looks like. The reality is that we oftentimes face a gap in engagement. I built some sweet tool. Why aren't you using it? And Agile, I think, is a great way to get around that and get people really reacting and using the stuff that you're building them. So you're trying to build things to save time, not just for yourself, but for your teammates. And yeah, a lot of people don't take advantage of those tools. So Agile, again, we're going to get into why that is that Agile can kind of elevate that engagement and get people to actually use the stuff that you're building. And then the third thing that I think is probably an understatement here is that Agile can help you really elevate the quality of your end product. As you're building something, the reality is that a lot of times there's going to be a beta phase, right? Like it's just not going to be perfect on your first go around. Maybe if it's a simple family or block, not a big deal. But as you go through a larger scale implementation of some kind of automation tool or some other kind of sophisticated tool to help your team, it's probably not going to solve 100% and work 100% of the time. So how can we get this to where you have fewer defects in your outputs, and how can you have your outputs more succinctly and directly address the thing that you're trying to solve, right? You want to solve for the right thing. So that's why Agile. Now, if we walk back in time, Agile is a fairly new methodology. I say fairly new. I think the year 2000 is kind of recent, but you look at the calendar and you kind of ask, is it? I'm getting old, but I'm not old yet. So if we go way back in time to 2000, 2001, there was this manifesto for Agile software development that was released. And this was kind of a meeting of a bunch of progressive, innovative minds that recognized all of these just inefficiencies in the way we were making things. And you know, they came from the software world, so they were really focused on that. But the prescription that they wrote has proven to be universally a good approach. So this manifesto really gets into this notion of really how can we do things better. And it comes down to really four big priorities. You know, their thought is that individuals and interactions are more important than tools and process. So to put that another way, when we embrace Agile, we're really looking to interact with our end user and with our teammates that are building the tools to get direct feedback and information. How is this working for you? And it's not a nebulous kind of spoken to the room. You're speaking directly to your end user or your teammate. And then the second kind of core philosophy is that the things that we build need to work. There's nothing more defeating than making something that only works half the time. And it's a great way to scare away the end user. It's a great way to make people think that what you're working on isn't worth their time to use. So working products is very important. And then also, this is maybe something that I think speaks more to what we do at Applied, where we have very much a consulting partnership relationship with a lot of you all. We're here to be a business partner, but you know, sometimes there's hangups on negotiations and other barriers that really are detrimental to just getting the work done, right? And so as you're thinking about yourself as a BIM manager, CAD manager, project manager, whatever you are, think about how can you facilitate better collaboration to get ideation and feedback. So work with your team. And then the last thing is that we do not work in an industry that is static. Change is a constant presence. And the plans that we try to put together oftentimes do not account for all the variables that might emerge. So Agile isn't really about in-depth, perfect planning. I'm not going to map out every possible outcome and plan for that. I'm going to go in with my best guess with the information I have in front of me, and then I'm going to go forward. And as things emerge, as we discover new information, we adjust on the fly. So being agile is the ability to respond to change. So these are kind of the four principal concepts that come with the agile framework. Again, this idea that we're going to directly interact with our people. the things that we're making work. They're actually functional. And then we believe in collaboration, and we believe in being able to respond to change. So there's really 12 principles of Agile. This is something that if you ever went to go get some kind of Agile practitioner certification for PMP, or if you were to get into Scrum or anything like that, that these are worlds that are, adjacent to the building industry, but they do, again, intersect, especially on like project management. But these 12 principles are kind of universal across the field. And understanding that this kind of governs the higher level philosophy, and then we have kind of more specialized segmentations that address specific industries and processes. This is kind of what covers at the top. And so principle one is this idea that the highest priority is to satisfy the customer. So if that's your office mates, make sure that what you're working on is actually gonna make them happy, make them want to use the thing that you're working on, and to give you more time to keep working on these things. Now, the second principle is that change is actually a good thing, even if it's late in the project. And I think this is one of the biggest mindset shifts that you have to take when you're looking to integrate Agile practices into your office. Change is good. And let me explain that a little bit. When we're working on a project and we don't actually capture all of the requirements up front, or some new thing is exposed down the road, that happens all the time. And we can't ignore that new information. So being able to respond and adapt to things that require change is okay, and it's ultimately going to lead to a better end product. And here's another principle that is, I think we all intuitively understand it, but it's also different to actually run your own organization by this. And it's this idea that we're not necessarily going to do a one and done thing. If I'm building a Revit family and I throw it over the fence to my team, am I done with it? Is that it? Do we never update it again? Or what if they have feedback? And then what if you're also working on something really big and you want to know, am I going in the right direction? So being able to do an incremental approach gives you more feedback earlier, and also helps you refine your end product to be closer to what the end user needs. Make that door family actually do what your architect needs. The fourth thing is that your business people and your tech people need to work together. And this is kind of cribbed from Agile, but let's put this in terms of the building industry. We oftentimes have a challenge in our offices where we have different roles, right? We have our drafters, our BIM technicians, we have our project managers, our engineers, we have our principals and other tools in there. And what happens a lot of times is that there is a chasm in communication that happens, that a principal or a project manager may not fully understand the challenges that the production team is going through. Why are we struggling to meet this deadline? And when you're able to kind of coalesce and work tightly together as a team, it can really reveal some of those pain points and some of those things that aren't working as well as they should. It can bring those to the table before they become real problems. Now, The fifth one is kind of more of a general term, but the fifth principle is that we really want to work with people that are motivated to see the project a success. When I work with a outside organization to develop something for them, one of the big things that we make the ask for is bring the people to the table that are passionate about this stuff. Who wants to see process improvement? We want their ideas, we want their engagement, and we'll help the rest of the teams, but to have a successful project, you need to be working with people that have that mindset of continuous improvement. And again, going back to the last slide, the sixth principle is that we really want to go straight into I'm going to pause for 1 second. I see something in the chat here. Caitlin, is my audio okay?
Sorry, what was that, Anthony?
Is my audio coming in through good?
I can hear it just fine. I had a message from Suzanne Mix that she was having a difficulty. So, Sean, if you're having troubles with that, I would suggest refreshing your page because she did that and she said it came back.
Okay. Sorry, I want to make sure that I'm not just cutting out for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, you're fine.
Okay. Hey, that's a great example of direct interaction. Thank you for interacting with me like that, Sean. So yes, when we talk about communication, there's nothing more harmful, I think, than just speaking to the room and not actually speaking to the person, right? When we think about like crisis training, if you've ever done like CPR training, gotten that certification, one of the big things they talk about is that you don't just say, can somebody call 911? You say, you, and you point to the person, call 911, right? And so having direct, unavoidable interaction, I think is a really key part of working in Agile. And that, I think, is especially important in this new hybrid work age that we live in, where we have a lot of people that are working at home, and a lot of people working at the office, and a lot of people working at another office somewhere else. So kind of bridging that gap and focusing on communication is really important. Now, the seventh principle kind of goes into, again, kind of a basic assumption that we can all agree on, but a working product, something that is actually stable enough to do its function, is the best measure of success. Make sure that if you write that Dynamo graph, it actually does what you expect it to do in the conditions it's been designed for. And, you know, there's a lot to unpack in that statement. But if you really think about this kind of high level, just know that it's better to not boil the ocean. Focus on making one feature 100% before you go add a bunch of other features. The eighth principle kind of comes back to what I alluded to earlier. We're all feeling probably a little bit overworked right now, right? The things have been crazy in our industry. We're all busy. It's good to be busy in some respects, but on the other hand, we need to have realistic deadlines. We need to have realistic pace of development. And so as we think about Agile, one of the big things, we'll get into this in a little bit, is this idea that you really do have to continually evaluate your where you are and the gap to where you need to be, and understand a realistic timeline for what it's going to take to get your product, your block, your family, whatever it is, to where it needs to be. And understand that for most of us, we have multiple responsibilities, and time block that out. Now, the ninth principle is really about taking the time to do things right. It's no good to half-ass something. Again, kind of going back to the seventh principle, these are kind of supportive of each other, complementary. We can't just go forward and build something that only kind of works and just get it done. Okay, set a schedule, set a deadline, and then work to actually build a quality product against that deadline. And again, you may be seeing a theme here, but a working product is the best measure of success. Don't boil the ocean. Here's principle 10, simpler is always better. Have something that works that's simple before it can do everything that you want it to do, right? One feature at a time. The 11th principle is kind of a quirk of Agile. I don't know that I always see this happening in our customer projects, but I think it's probably more pertinent for you as you do internal projects. Self-organizing teams are the best teams. So, as you go forward and try, again, to engage people, you want to work with people that are motivated to see this project to success. By that same token, it kind of just naturally happens, right? People that want this to happen will support you and work with you to make it happen. So thinking about that, if you're a one-man band, maybe you've got some trusted lieutenants in the production staff that are willing to be the guinea pigs and to try out your tools, or are willing to give you feedback and say, hey, look, this thing you built a couple of months ago is only working when I do this, but I want it to do that. And then the last thing is, I think, one of the most important parts of Agile, which is reflection, self-reflection and autopsy of a project. As you run through and you do your work, you should regularly reflect on the lessons you've learned, both from your success and your failure. A lot of times when we go forward and we do our work, it's very easy to just go straight into the next project, go straight to the next thing. And this is something that just came up today, but there's this idea of working fast and this idea of working slow. Sometimes we have to work fast and sometimes we have to work slow. And the reality is that taking that time to recalibrate and make sure that we're moving in the right direction and doing things in a way that's best for us, we have to go slow. We have to take that time to do that self-reflection and analysis. Okay, let's jump to the next slide here. So something that I think is worth mentioning as I'm talking about all of this is you are hearing this presentation from someone that works in a consulting organization that delivers services to a broad swath of industry. And something that I do want to make clear is that Agile is something that isn't boilerplate, right? There's principles, there's a framework, but you make it work for you and you customize it to how it needs to be. This is kind of the way we approach Agile. This is the way we approach our larger project management, where we really have integrated 3 core philosophies of design thinking, which is really how you come up with ideas for solutions and identify problems that need to be solved. And then really getting into lean startup, where we're starting to test ideas, make sure that they're worth moving forward. But what we're really talking about, because there's actually been 2 previous webinars that I've done that talk about more about the strategy and implementation side, now we're in development. And this is really, again, about Agile. So we're going to dial in on this last piece here, right? The development Agile cycle. And we kind of adhere to Scrum. You heard this before, but there's actually a number of subsets of Agile that get more specific to industry and the kind of work you do. I really like the Scrum cycle. And the reason why is because it kind of produces this continuous improvement loop that allows you to run through and make your product, make your deliverable, and continue to make it better and better while giving your team something that they can use. So the Scrum cycle kind of has 5 key parts to it. You can pull that apart. There's some other things that might fall into this, but this is really high level what we have. So in there, we have the sprint planning, we have the sprint execution, we have the shippable increment, we have the sprint review, and we have a product backlog. So let's kind of get into what each of those is. So the first thing is we have the sprint planning. And the sprint planning is really something that initiates the actual sprint, the Scrum cycle, and it lays out the work that we need to perform. And this is typically a collaborative planning effort that we're trying to engage people that are going to use the tool, use the product, and people that are going to build it, and people that are going to test it, right? So get kind of a general idea of who's responsible for what. A lot of times there's a product owner, that's probably going to be you, but this is someone that owns the overall product output. And then what you're going to do is you're going to try to address these 3 questions I have up here. The first is, why is the sprint valuable, right? Like, again, why are we doing this? Why are we taking the time to build this automation tool, this plugin? And then as you kind of ask this question, also think about how could you increase the value of what you're doing, right? What other features, what other things would make what you're doing even more impactful for your office? The second thing is, again, don't think about a sprint as an entire tool. Think about it as a single feature. So maybe, for instance, if we were to go back to the Revit door example, maybe your sprint is that you're going to build in a swappable door panel function. So you can swap out from a solid core to a half light to a full light door, right? Like that's a super simple example, but you want to add that kind of functionality into your Revit family so that your end users can change out the door panel types. As we're thinking about a sprint, we're really looking to add that feature. We're not looking to build an entire door library or something like that, right? It's really about being laser focused. We're going to build this feature and then we're going to put it out there. So that kind of brings us to the second thing, which is what can be done in this sprint. We have to be realistic about what we're going after. How big a tool is this? How big a feature is this? Kind of dial in and be very locked in and understand what you need to deliver. And then the last thing is, how is the work actually going to get done? You know, I think this is a really big question because, again, we're all busy. So how is the work going to get done if we all have so much on our plate? So this is a question that's meant to prompt, does your calendar need to get cleared? Do you need to put a block out, right? Do I need to go to my Outlook calendar and do I need to put like 2 hours for the next 3 Fridays in the afternoon to just focus and work on this thing? So project how much time you think it's going to take to build this feature, to get through this sprint, and then block it out, make it happen. Now, once we kind of lock all that in, we're going to go into the sprint. And the sprint is a fixed length event. And what I mean by that is that this is really where you're trying to deliver your deliverable and your product. But we need a deadline to all of this, right? We need a hard date that we can hold ourselves accountable to really get from start to finish. I think a lot of about like organizational behavior and like group forming. A lot of times when we form a group, it kind of goes to I forget what it is exactly. Forming, storming, and norming. I think there's one I'm forgetting in there. But the idea is that you're going to form a group, you're going to figure out what you're going to do, and then you're going to go do it. But what actually happens is that we spend in our month to get something done, we'll spend the first half of that just not doing anything. And then as the deadline compresses, then we focus on doing what has to be done. So a deadline obviously spurs action. And to this point, the sprint likes to have tight deadlines. Put it out a month, put it out 2 weeks, whatever it needs to be to get your turnaround. Keep it realistic, but don't put it off in the distance, because then you're going to wait until you have to get it done. And then the other thing is, and this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, but once you actually go into the sprint, that's not the time to start making changes. You can come in as you learn stuff that maybe you need to make changes, but ultimately you shouldn't be making changes that could jeopardize your ability to get the work done. The thing that's worth remembering when it comes to this sprint cycle with Scrum is that it's a continuous loop. We're going to continually run around over and over through all these steps. So it's okay to be running through a sprint, realize that there's something that has to change, and then ultimately say, we're going to make that change, but not yet. First, we're going to get this first beta release out there, and then we'll go back and make the change. And that kind of leads to the third point, which is that a lot of times as we get into things, and here's an actual example that I've got for you. I was building a family library for a customer a couple of weeks ago, and I was exporting out a type catalog in Revit for hundreds of types for these families. And it turns out there's a parameter that doesn't export correctly when you use the export function in Revit. I had no idea that was the problem until the customer was going through the types, and there's this one parameter that was breaking. So in that case, that's a scope change, right? It's like, oh, I learned something we didn't all realize was a problem, or I think a defect in Revit. And so we had to go back and adjust the scope. It's like, okay, well, now we're going to have to build a tool that helps output this data for the type catalog. Scope changes. That's okay. We learn new things as we're going through the project. But as we're thinking about what the actual sprint is, understand that we shouldn't be changing things unless we have a really good reason to, and it can't jeopardize what you're actually trying to get done. Now, an interesting attribute of Agile and of Scrum is kind of having a daily checkpoint meeting. Part of me gets a little bit hesitant to put this one out here. It doesn't always make sense to do, but some version of this I think is really important. And it's this idea that you have a daily check-in. You keep it really short. 15 minutes is typically the standard increment. It's a 15-minute meeting. And what you do is you just really quickly check what progress have we made since yesterday. That's a great way to hold you accountable. Is that you identify any roadblocks that have emerged. And this is a really powerful thing, right? If you're stuck, why are you stuck? And alert the people that can help you get unstuck. So the daily scrum is the place where that should happen. The third thing is that this is a place where we can make decisive decision making. It's like, okay, hey, we have a question, or do we want to do Y? In here, we can pretty quickly determine we're going to do X, we're going to do Y, or it can be we're going to research this and we're going to have a definitive answer after we do the research. So it's not about being indecisive and waffling around. It's making decisive plans of action or immediately coming to a conclusion and consensus on what needs to be done. And the fourth thing that I think is also really important here is that I don't know about you guys, but a lot of times I feel like I have too many meetings in a week. And the Daily Scrum is really intended to displace the other meetings for the project. So you might have other projects that have their own meetings. But in this methodology, we try to reduce the amount of meetings and keep, during the sprint, a single daily 15-minute meeting where we check these things. And we don't block out our calendars, bog it down with other meetings. Now, once we kind of get through that sprint, what we're actually working towards is a shippable increment. And this is kind of a concrete stepping stone towards that end goal. So to kind of put that in different terms, if I had that door family that I alluded to, and I wanted this to be the best door family, and it can do all these things, I can schedule it, I can extract product data out of it, whatever it is I need it to do. That's my overall goal. But in this sprint, I'm just, again, adding one feature. And that feature is swappable door panels. So as we think about this, an increment is the completion of that feature. We'll keep going through the continuous cycle, but this is the shippable increment with that concrete deliverable feature X. Now, you can actually have multiple shippable increments in a single sprint. And really, the idea here, though, is that you've agreed upon this beforehand. So you know what you're working towards, and you're going to work towards it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that there is this definition of done. And the definition of done is kind of a formal description of the state of the increment. And it's really what it's saying is that your product meets the quality measures required for the product. So as you saw in the principles, we don't believe in releasing defective or broken features. So as you're working to meet this definition of done and to deliver this shippable increment, it must not be defective, right? It must meet a certain level of quality and do the thing it needs to do. And something that I like about this is that it creates transparency. This definition creates transparency and provides everyone with a shared understanding of what work was completed and what it needed to do. Now, kind of going back to the introspection and the self-reflection, we also have the sprint review. And the purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and to determine the future adaptation. So the Scrum team, you maybe, present the results of your work to the key stakeholders. And this is really, really important. How does your office know if you've done your work, right? I made this cool new door family improvement. Let people know. So the sprint review is a good place to kind of consolidate that information, recap, and distribute that information to the office. Now, as we also look at this, we're not just looking at what was accomplished, we're also trying to take stock of what changed, right? So I discovered that defect in Revit type catalog exporting. Well, that's new information. So there's a new sprint that is building a tool to help facilitate exporting data that the inside of Revit function can't do. So this is a place to update your plan with this new information and really help identify what we're going to do next. So this is the second to last event of the sprint. And this is kind of its own meeting. So I set the daily scrum. We finished our sprint cycle. We now have this meeting. But once we do that, we're now going to look at the last thing, which is the product backlog. And the product backlog is kind of an ordered list of what needs to improve in the product. And this is kind of our single source of truth. This is where the work is defined. We're going to build a plugin for Civil 3D that augments the sheet set manager, or we're going to create a Revit add-in that can automate Excel to Revit data exchange. So this is kind of like the big bucket, but what falls under there, right? What are the things that we need to do to make those things happen? So the product backlog items are really going to have a number of things that can be done in a single sprint, but we're going to do multiple sprint cycles. And this is an ongoing activity, right? This product backlog, it is a living document. It is something that we're going to continue to add new information to. We'll take stuff off if we determine we don't need something. And again, it's something that we all kind of hold ourselves accountable to. And really, what this is about is a commitment to the product goal, which is describing that future state of the product, of your service, whatever it is. And what we're trying to say is that this is where we want to be. Here's where we are. Here's the gap. Here's how we cover that gap. So just kind of to bring this to a close here, we have some real powerful advantages of Agile. Again, it promotes customer satisfaction as their feedback and changes are embraced. So I talked about how a lot of times when we build things for our office, they can be ignored. By embracing Agile, by releasing these incremental improvements, when I make my new feature, I say, Office, I made this cool new thing. Try it out. Let me know. Does it work? That's great because they see the feature, they see it works, or they see it doesn't, and they see you respond to that. Oh, it didn't work in this situation. Let me fix it. And so you get kind of this greater interaction between your office. You can get more opportunities to engage them. And by having this more continuous engagement, they are exposed to the tools that you're making more often. And kind of a culture of continuous improvement by doing that. And ultimately, that's going to lead them as being more familiar with your product improvements. They're going to use them more. We also reduce risk, right? So by kind of having incremental deliverables, what if I went through and I decided to make a Dynamo graph, and this Dynamo graph was going to solve this crazy thing in my project workflow. And then we determined we're going to do this in increments, and we released the first increment, and then it's realized that all of the other features that we needed are actually extraneous and a distraction, and it was the first thing that we needed, and only that. That's a really powerful thing. So being able to reduce risk by having early deliverables, not I'm going to go lock myself in a room for 6 months and turn around and then give you the end product. Again, that's an important concept. And then kind of, again, accompanying that is that we don't need to do exhaustive planning, right? We want to be diligent. We do want to capture the requirements, but we're not going to spend a month researching every nook and cranny. We're going to do our due diligence. We're going to start moving forward. And as we start getting live feedback, as we start doing our active project development, we're going to learn things that we can use to update in the next cycle. So it's okay that we don't capture everything up front. And this kind of dovetails into by having kind of this more uh, agile approach, you do a little bit more freedom, right? You don't need to have like this tight checklist of rules. Do this, do that, do this, do that. It's more about just this general framework. And then kind of to bring it all to a close here, you've got the ability to, by dividing your product, your project into incremental deliverables, you're able to get stuff to your end user faster. You're able to really focus on the quality of that one feature rather than having the entire thing all at once. And ultimately, it leads to a higher quality output. There's some other advantages, but I think I really want to call those out. Now, two more things, and then I'm done. So some tips that I've got when you're actually doing product development, when you're working on your Dynamo graph, your plugin, your extension, your block, your newest template, understand that there is a kind of a constant tension at play. We want to over-engineer and we don't want to under-engineer. But we don't want to over-engineer to the point where we're creating a lot of maintenance debt. So it's better to have a simple product that can be used in a straightforward way rather than a highly customized product or tool that can only be used for one solution and no one but you understands how to update it. So you kind of hit that Goldilocks sweet spot right in the middle of it's got to be functional, got to do the thing it needs to do, but don't make it do too much. And then, the last thing, kind of, there is another piece to all of this, which we're not covering today. And it's just kind of, as we think about Agile, there is also the ideation component where we think about how we're going to make something. So we're going to envision what it is that we're going to do. We're going to speculate on how it's going to be done, set that project timeline. And then we're actually going to go through and begin to detail out what the work is and then build it. Once we build it, we're going to take it to that end user feedback, right? So this is a larger feedback loop. And once we get there, we're going to finish it out. So thinking about Agile, there are multiple layers to this. I encourage you to really get into thinking about how it can work for you. So that kind of concludes what I wanted to present today. To kind of bring this all back to a close here, Agile is a methodology for project management and product development that was developed in the software industry. It's been incredibly successful in changing the way that industry works for the better. And so we've seen a lot of transference as it's migrated into the building industry. And there are a lot of good things that we can do and learn from in Agile that we can then apply to our own work. And by taking Agile, we can be better at making the things that save time. So that's what I've got. Thanks for your time. Hopefully you can use this and apply it to save the time that you spend watching this.